And we love is not a receding horizon we reach for. Love is the ground on which we lay. Love is the ground on which we lay. Worthiness is not a mountain top we strive toward. It is the field in which we play. It is the field in which we play.
Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, in all the places that you are. I'm so grateful to folks for joining. My name is Rabbi Jessica. I am talking to you from Dakota and Anishinaabe land in what's currently called by many South Minneapolis. And I have basically, since Dean's book came out in the winter, wanted to find some excuse to bring him to a room full of Jews to talk about relationships. And Tu B'Av seemed like the time to do it. That was the day that ended at sunset yesterday. We had Tu B'Av on Shabbos, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that day is. But first, just to land, you can turn on auto captions on the bottom of your Zoom screen. I love seeing people's faces when I'm talking in Zoom worlds like this. So if you'd like to have your camera on, you could be eating, there could be babies or dogs or cats, or folding laundry. If you have to move around, please turn your camera off for people's visuals of that. But yeah, grateful to be in a room where we can see each other. Dean and I will not be probably like able to try. If you are a chat person and you want to chat with each other, great. If you're so distracted by the chat, close the chat, don't look at it. Dean and I will probably not be tracking the chat most of the time, but we will have some time for questions, I think, or we're going to aim for that. So I think that is the housekeeping. Oh, and there is Tzedek Chicago. Aviva is here. If you have tech questions, you can message Aviva. Okay, that is us getting started. So before we go any further, what is Tu B'Av? So it is a Jewish holiday that I never knew about growing up. Learned as an adult of the 15th of Av, as a day seen as, or we're taught in the Mishnah and the early rabbinic texts, it is as joyous for the Jewish people as Yom Kippur. So already like a beautiful connection between romantic relationships and repair, and reckoning and accountability. This is the day when we're told the daughters of Jerusalem would go out in white clothes that they borrowed from another. So to do a kind of like class disruption so that you wouldn't be able to tell from the clothing what class background people are coming from. And it was a day of love celebration and matchmaking where the women would dance in the vineyards in their white garments. There's so much, we're going to do a little bit more rabbinic text digging in this time, and we will probably a little bit engage with and then also leave plenty of the patriarchy and misogyny and Jewish supremacy of Jewish texts like unengaged with in its full depth of what it needs, but we are saying it is there, and also seeing what we can learn from it, from these Jewish texts as we go. So it is this minor holiday about love and relationships, and also it's gotten a lot more meaningful for me as we start to look at the bigger picture of this season, and especially as Dean is one of the main people who has taught me and pushed me about thinking about collapse in our time, structural collapse, the climate chaos, the genocide that we're seeing, and all of the interwoven impacts of it. We are in this time in the Jewish year where a week ago we marked Tisha B'Av, the morning of the destruction of the temple, the fall of empire crumbling around us. We're now in this upswing where we're going to mark Tu B'Av and celebrate love, and then move into Elul and thinking about relationships. Dean's book, I think, has two core pieces of foundational wisdom. First, that relationships are hard work and take care and intention because we bring all of our messiest and hurt parts to our interpersonal relationships and play them out on the people we love the most. So charming. And second, that everything that we are trying to do in this lifetime, in this world, especially transforming systems of domination and capitalism and white supremacy and patriarchy, requires us to work in relationships. We really need each other. And I think that those two pieces, that's very reflected in Jewish tradition as well, that we need each other. And that's part of what we're in the arc of this season, moving from the wreckage, the grief and destruction of all of what's happening around us, and then bringing in love so that we can do soul searching and Elul in the next month, teshuva, repair, and then move from that into building a new year, a new world. And Tu B'Av is this hinge where we move from destruction and grief towards accounting of our souls and interpersonal repair. So that's what we're going to do today, is try to bring in some love and wisdom to strengthen our relationships, because as Dean has said, we are all that we have. Our opposition has all the money and all the power, and we have each other. So let's take care of each other a little better. I am gonna turn it to you now, Dean, to start with a little bit about why you wrote the book, what you've learned in the maybe 7 or 8 months since the book came out, what kind of reception the book has had, and what that's taught you about relationships and community, our community in this time.
Thank you, Jessica, and thank you, Aviva. It's really special to get to have this conversation. Um, and Jessica has changed my life so much, in many ways, being in a friendship with conversation about many things, but including that as a rabbi and someone who's helping me think in new ways about Jewish texts. So it's really fun to get to have an event where we're thinking about this particular um, holiday and these particular texts alongside my book. It's a real treat. And when you were just talking, I was just feeling how much like other people are not optional. It's just like living in capitalism, it's like it promotes an idea of individualism that tells us that like other people are optional, that like if you were just rich enough, other people would just do what you said, and that like, this whole idea of the individual like ignores gendered labor and racialized labor and like our interconnectedness with all beings and with the planet itself. And like on the day-to-day level, that can just look like thinking other people are annoying and like that if they bother us, we can cut them off. And like the reality is that we actually just like need each other so badly. And we notice it if we become sick or if we are trying to do something to fight unfairness, then we notice that we need other people really badly. But I think there's still a mythology that we can all like a fantasy we can all like sometimes just like visit that like I actually read something recently about how this can be one of the ways people misuse boundaries is like thinking that if other people are hard, I can just cut them off. And it's like actually just not an option. And also there's not, and sometimes I think the world of social media tells us there's like an unending number of people out there who you could like climb to or get that would be better than the ones you currently have. Or like I think dating apps can have that feeling, like I'll just trade up for something better. In reality, like most of us are kind of like stuck with people who maybe are our neighbors or already know us or doing the work in the same areas of transformative change in our communities. Like it's like, yeah, I noticed that as somebody who's been doing certain kinds of organizing work for decades, like I'm going to keep running into the same people, whether I like them or not. And so it's
Yeah.
worthwhile to repair.
Yeah,
Um,
I think about that a lot right now with the anti-Zionist Jewish community, where there are so many more of us, and also there are not enough of us that we can discard anyone. And they're not, yeah, this is who we've got, and this is who we're gonna work with. Yeah.
yeah, and the people we treat badly in dating or whatever are going to turn up, around us for the rest of our lives. But yeah, so this is why I wrote this book, to answer your question, is because I've been doing political work for my whole adult life and really noticing that like it all just comes down to relationships. Like, like whether we can stick together enough to like move something, to stay with our message, to convince each other when there's important disagreements politically about like why we're having certain perspectives, to be able to hear other people's perspectives and change our minds and like improve our solidarities when that's what's called for. And I've just seen so many groups I've worked in fall apart over interpersonal dynamics that sometimes also had, usually it's like there's a politicized reason people are mad at each other, but there's also an interpersonal dynamic. And most of us, like, when we're in the conflict, we just stick to the politicized reason and we don't want to talk about the other things that happened, like feeling left out or rejected or like, um, what were the kind of interpersonal dynamics that are always going alongside all the political dynamics. So I've seen that over the years, and I've also simultaneously like very intensely for my own well-being used like a lot of self-help type tools and found that they're so limited, like the ways they're like written and made are mostly like, very heterosexist and ableist and racist and classist and stuff. And so I often would be like, I'm telling my friend about this thing from this book, but I can't actually give you this book because it's like gonna upset you so much to read the other stuff that's around this one cool idea in this book. So I originally just wanted to like translate some of those useful things out and put them through feminist, anti-capitalist, disability justice, anti-racist, anti-colonial type of like lenses that people in our communities think through. And then I think in the process of that, I was writing the book for about 10 years, also like a lot. Some of the content is not from those sources, but is that kind of combination of like things I learned from supporting myself and like other people in our communities through hard times. And like you said, just really seeing that like people mostly treat each other like the very worst in dating and sexual relationships. And 30% of us are in domestic violence relationships, queer or straight, according to the statistics. And so I think of the book as an anti-violence tool because I think a lot of the things that eventually become really intense conflicts, are just common amongst us all the time. And in terms of what I've heard since it's come out, I mean, it's been really cool to hear what people get out of it. It's also been interesting, like people telling me like, I'm scared to read this book because I'm going through a breakup and I feel really activated, or I'm scared that this book will make me have to look at things I judge myself for, or that I'll feel judged by the book. It's been nice. People have said they feel the book is gentle and doesn't feel like it judges them. And that's my experience of it is like, I'm a shame monster. I need a lot of gentleness. And so I feel like um, I I wrote the book as what I need, So I hope that it doesn't feel, it's more like, oh, right, we all are doing this stuff. It's like these really common patterns. And if we noticed they were patterns, would that help us realize it's not us and like get that critical distance to be like, oh, uh I don't know if I really believe that. That's just been programmed here. And also my hope was that the book be used like people who didn't read it, like that someone would screenshot like a list or a chart from the book and send it to their friend on text. And people have told me that's happening, which makes me really happy that like, because not everyone wants to read a book, but could we just get some common tools that maybe circulate a bit more in our communities that help us spot the patterns. So, and I also say that I had like maybe 6 months of doing a lot of events around the book that were in-person events. And that was really incredible because I've just noticed people like really wanting to get together in person, especially since the election, and just like really longing for spaces to feel everything that's happening. And also I was doing the events as COVID safe as I could, like with masks and air filters and stuff. And I think that helped people who don't always get to go to events show up and feel that connectivity that people are desperate for right now. So that has been a really important part of the process for me too.
Yeah, that has been such a gift to get to find ways to be together around this. Is there any of like, is there any one kind of pattern that you put in the book that people are most like, oh shit, this is anything that people that you feel like is bubbling to the surface of like, this is what is landing for people?
I think the first thing is always just the romance myth, the pattern in our society that romantic relationships are more important than other relationships, that you should ditch your friends or your other interests or your politics for this, that if you don't have this, there's something wrong with you. A lot of people talking to me at events about how they feel like ditched by their friends who are choosing romantic partnerships and family life over them, and that they feel like alone in the context of collapse and COVID and all the stuff because they're not like the most important person to anyone. I think this is really profound, like pattern. And then also the ways the romance myth makes people expect that like someone's going to solve all their problems and meet all their needs. And then people get super isolated and really unsatisfied and then are like in these miserable, often sexless, resentful relationships because the expectations of what this type of relationship should feel like from the romance myth are so high. And then all your eggs are in that basket. And so instead of being like, well, Jessica's the person I want to talk to about this stuff, and Stacy's the person I want to talk to about this stuff, and Shelly's, like instead of having like robust lives full of different kinds of zones of excitement and support, people are like expecting this one person to do it all, and then that makes you like not like that person and also ditch everybody else, so now you're like alone with that person, which is super not likely to make that relationship robust.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think we'll get into this a little bit more in a bit, but I'm one of the reasons that I feel passionate about spiritual and cultural community building is that it is a space where we can get care and political and emotional and communal needs met that doesn't have to like end when a campaign ends. Like actually when, I like, as I'm part of, JVP or Palestine Solidarity organizing, I hope that Palestine is free speedily and that JVP can close up shop, and that the anti-Zionist Jewish cultural organizations we're building will outlive that and actually be like, and it feels really important to like create, because when we say like, okay, let's not put all of our relationship eggs in the romance basket in 2025, it's really hard to know where else to put it when we are like, people have to move all the time, people's jobs are so unstable, like where do we build? So, okay, we'll get a little bit into that. We're gonna look at some Jewish text in a minute. Before we do that, I just want to open or invite you to share if there's anything about Jewish tradition or wisdom that has shaped your thinking on relationships for the good or the bad. Like if there's something meaningful from Jewish tradition that is positively or been like, oh yeah, like want to bring that forward, or if there's things where you're like, ooh, this is what I've seen in Jewish community or from Jewish texts that we have to uproot, and challenge.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I put in the book is like I had this really profound experience at a Jewish wedding many, many years ago where the people who were getting married, like when they read the ketubah, they asked everyone to witness them like promising to treat each other kindly and with like within their ethics when and if they break up. And I was like, that is some sober stuff. Like that is so right on to be like, we don't just want you to see us in cute outfits. We want you to like realize we know we're doing something that like it can be really high stakes for communities when people break up. People treat each other terribly, you know? And so to ask your community to witness that as well as to witness like the fun part where you're currently really excited to be joining your lives in a different way. And I think there was something about Jewish tradition letting you put what you want in the marriage contract that feels really different from what I learned marriage is like from just like whatever mainstream US Christian supremacist culture, which is like just, this set of legal obligations, and instead be like, oh no, we get to decide. So that was really meaningful. I think also just like in general, studying Jewish text in different Torah study spaces and in your Judaism 101 class and in like other spaces, I feel like there's a through line about like having to be ethical with other people and think about that all the time. You know what I mean? And like that not being like an automatic. It's not like, are you a good person or a bad person? And trying to get people to think you're good. It's like, this will continually be thorny and require thought, and there will be difficult situations where there's not an obvious answer. I feel like that is like just seems to be in the anti-Zionist Jewish spaces where I have done study. It seems like that is the norm. And one more thing I'll add is I feel like for me personally, like taking on a Shabbat practice, which I've had more and less success with at different times in my life, has been really important. Like as somebody who overschedules my time and can feel overly obligated to like every community event and every gathering, to like have some time where I haven't already signed myself up for what I'm going to do and where I get to decide in that moment how I feel and what's authentic to me is a really different like that's and to have and to value solitude, which is like easy to not value when you're like, I need to say yes to everyone. Like for me, I know that some people are on the other side of that coin and have a harder time saying yes to sociality. But for people like me, like all of my relating is going to be better if I can practice choosing to relate instead of feeling obligated.
I love that. Yeah, well, and I think, well, you heard it here first, everyone. Dean Spade loves marriage, loves Jewish marriage famously. The ketubah and has such a complicated history because, of course, traditionally it's like women are property. And there's like some powerful protections in even a traditional ketubah about divorce, like protecting women in cases of divorce. And to be in a contemporary context where people are using the ketubah to actually articulate what do we want. And I think for queer folks who have to rewrite their ketubah anyway, to be like, okay, to knowing that like ethical separation is like part of the story. yeah, so we see like whole evolution of Jewish ritual and practice and ethics in the Ketuvah.
I have
Yeah.
to say that my visions of Judaism are very shaped by the fact that I like only practice Jewish things with like anti-Zionist witches, like queer witches. So like I only have like the most beautiful reimagining of Jewish culture and practice compared to probably some people's experiences in like very more traditional, more patriarchal Jewish spaces. So
It's great. May that be so in the future for everyone. And I did not ask Dean that question to get in a plug for Intro to Judaism at Tzedek Chicago, but Rabbi Brant and I will be teaching it again this year and would love for folks to join us. So we're gonna look a little bit at some Jewish text to put in conversation with your book, another Jewish text. So one of the texts that I've done the most study of tshuva from is Hilchot Tshuva by Maimonides, the Rambam. Credit due to Rabbis Ari Lev and Monica Gumri at Kol Tzedek, who led for like 3 years a study of Hilchot Tshuva on Zoom during Elul, is part of my familiarity with it. It is, of course, a very imperfect Jewish text with Jewish supremacy, patriarchy, some of which we'll get to wrestle with again here, and some of which we'll be wrestling with the rest of our lives, all of which. We're just gonna like pluck out a verse from Hilchot Tshuva where the Rambam writes, anyone who verbalizes his confession without resolving in his heart to abandon the sin can be compared to a person who immerses himself in a mikveh, a purification ritual, while holding the carcass of a lizard in his hand. His immersion will not be of avail until he casts away the carcass. So a little bit, we could spend a lot more time on this text, but holding a dead thing in your hand would negate the cleansing that the mikveh ritual is supposed to do, which speaks to 1,000 years of struggle between what we say we do and what we're actually doing, which I think is also part of what your book is addressing. So I'm curious, like any tools that you have to close that gap between what we say and what we do.
yeah, that's such a
Or any other thoughts on this text? Yeah.
I love the dead lizard in the hand part. So it's so gross and good. I mean, so I think I learned this from Shannon Perez Darby, who's like a really brilliant anti-violence writer, educator, organizer. And Shannon uses the phrase is like accountability is like doing what you say you're gonna do, like being able to live your life according to how you believe it, which like of course is a huge struggle for all of us. Like no one is living that. Here we are using computers with these terrible minerals in them and bought from these horrible companies. Like, all of our lives are very, very compromised by living in white supremacy and capitalism and colonialism, and we're all struggling to like become the people who could live in the world that we're trying to build. And it's like this ongoing process. And I think this book is ultimately about that. It's about like the steps of that include like noticing when I'm not, like most of us struggle to notice, and we help each other. Like that's one of the things our movement and cultural spaces do, is help us like reflect on when we're out of solidarity with one another or like outside of our values. And then like how to keep remembering that if something's become an ingrained habit or like an entire way of thinking about like other people and ourselves. Like, we have just been so deeply brainwashed to survive in the systems that we live, the systems of domination that we live under. So yeah, for me, a lot of this book is about knowing when we're emotionally activated. I think a lot of our worst behaviors happen when we are having a really strong feeling, and then it's hard to remember things we've learned as we've gone in our lives. Like we might then go right back to things we learned through trauma or through like really repeated conditioning early in life. And like when we're really relaxed and calm, we can keep in all the layers of learning, but when we're freaked out, we go to like some autopilot behavior. or beliefs about ourselves or others. I think there's a conflict, and now I'm like, Jessica's bad or Dean's bad, and I just get really stuck there. And so a lot of the book is about like noticing what comes up when we're activated. And one of the big pieces of that is that when we act the worst is usually when we're feeling like we're the victim. And this is really hard for us to remember, that like the moment where I feel aggrieved or like left out or hurt by others is when I'll feel the most entitled to kind of aggressive action against others, like violating someone else's privacy is really common in romance and sex, or writing people really mean messages, or writing things about others on the internet, or um, like whatever, like that's when I might feel like I almost like life or death, like I'm under attack and I must. And then a lot of the actions we regret or that disorganize our communities or hurt others come from those moments. And so the skill set of like noticing when we're emotionally activated and when we're running a script about being aggrieved or victimized, like having there be the yellow flag, uh-oh, I'm feeling that way. I should talk to a friend before I press send on this email, or before I post this thing on the internet about other people, or before I um maybe I need a moment of pause before I say the next thing in our conversation, because I'm feeling this way. And it's really counter to what we think, because often it's like I need to protect myself right now by like going after you. I think a lot of this book is about that, the skill set, because that is the like one of the worst gaps. I mean, there's gaps all the time in our accountability, but that's like when you do the thing that's just, and then a lot of us feel like we have to keep defending that behavior forever, because it's so painful to realize that we did something that wasn't according to our values, or that we feel ashamed. And that kind of shame can mean we keep defending it and have like entrenched dynamics with people in our communities or families. um I think that like that's the aim here. In some ways, this book is like just a book about emotional awareness. Like if I noticed what was going on, and if I noticed the thought pattern happening in my head, could I have that like millimeter of distance that lets me be like, that might not be entirely true about that person or about me. Maybe I should like see if I can bring any balance to this belief before I choose my action.
I'm just like what you said about we act the worst when we feel aggrieved or like a victim. I immediately am thinking about the genocide in Gaza and the continuation of a narrative of Jews as perpetual victims, justifying horrible violence, like used to justify really horrible behavior. And yeah, like how we shift that story both like individually and collectively in a way that doesn't minimize real hurt has happened. Anti-Semitism is real, the Holocaust of course happened, and that like the what would have been true on a historical global scale if there had been that pause after, collectively actual grieving and not moving into yeah um the intense violence. So I'm just to bring it from the interpersonal to
I mean, that's one of the tools, is if our harm is minimized, we're more likely to have to act out and target. Like if no one's listening to me, then I'm more likely to have, so one of the things I talk about in the workshops I've been doing lately, especially, is just like, and it's in the book too, like listening skills. Like if somebody's really upset in my community group or whatever, and when they come to talk to me about it, I try to shut them up with advice or by minimizing it, then they might have to blow up bigger, But if they really feel heard and seen in what happened in the group or in the relationship, then they might also, the kind of wave of their upset and might crest, and they might be able to come down and be like, what are the pragmatic steps that are right sized for addressing this? Like at the piece around being heard and grieving, that being missing in a society that minimizes harm is often, I think, what leads to like us all justifying attacks.
yeah. Well, and I'm also like, in the original text, about holding the lizard carcass. Like, I think the metaphor is about like you're continuing to do the transgression while asking for forgiveness for it. And I think it's interesting to think about like what are the lizards in our hands, and it could be it could be our story about perpetual victimhood. It could be a shame lizard. I might take this metaphor a little too far, but kind of like recognizing for ourselves like what are we likely to be holding in our hands, and kind of like keeps us from immersing.
And there's like a complexity there because I think we see like when there's kind of like false, like co-optive apologies and stuff, like when governments apologize for colonialism or whatever. I'm thinking about like when the US like apologized for like annexing Hawaii, but like the legislation has nothing inside it that lets indigenous people like have any sovereignty or take back their land. Like, like the kind of there's so much false, like fake inclusion and fake apology in our society. And on the other hand, there's like we can be trying to get right and know we will never fully get right. So like what's the like grounded, sincere apology and recognition that also doesn't pretend the work ends? Since we all see like fake ones that are about like trying to clean off someone's reputation. Like I think this asks us to do work about asking what's my motivation when I
Mm.
when I sought forgiveness or apology, what was my motivation, and was it to clean up my reputation, or when I did a new behavior, was it reputation management, or was it like a humble attempt to be on a long path of like you know improving my alignment with my own ethics.
Okay, speaking of that, we're going to look at this next, I think even more challenging text. Okay, am I doing it right? So we have also from Hilchot Tshuva. Oh, I think this is 210, and I use the same title from the last slide. Rambam writes, "It is forbidden for a person to be cruel and refuse to be appeased." So if someone comes and asks for forgiveness, you are forbidden from refusing the apology refusing the apology. Rather, he should be easily pacified but hard to anger. When the person who wronged him asks for forgiveness, he should forgive him with a complete heart and a willing spirit. Even if he aggravated and wronged him severely, he should not seek revenge or bear a grudge. This is the path of the seed of Israel and their upright spirit. In contrast, the insensitive Gentiles do not act in this manner. Rather, their wrath is preserved forever. So I thought about editing out the deeply incorrect and painful Jewish supremacist part of this text, and also I want us to know what is in our text and wrestle with it. It is really absurd and painful, and in this time of Zionist genocide of Palestinians, in the false claim of Jewish safety, really absurd to read this, that somehow Jews are better at forgiveness than non-Jews. And I think kind of like inverting it in our time is wrestling with how all people are capable of harm, and all people are capable of giving and receiving forgiveness and making repair. And it's not always like obvious when or how to do that, like when or how to forgive people, especially given the when people are continuing violence, when there's extreme power imbalance. So I just wanted to, ask you your thoughts on forgiveness, how we make tshuva and ask for forgiveness when we really don't want to, how we can give people forgiveness when it's appropriate, like when that is or is not meaningful and appropriate.
Yeah. I mean, there's a few things. Like one thing is like if I don't feel like forgiving someone, have I not gotten enough space to grieve what happened? You know?
Mm.
And so not rushing ourselves. Like I don't it's not it doesn't work to be like you must forgive now and try to crush all the feelings, right? At the same time, am I in any habits where where I get some thrill about feeling vengeful towards someone or holding on to what they did wrong a long time ago? Like, is that really serving me? In the book, I talk about like, how what's a good apology? Because most of us don't learn it. We don't learn how to really apologize. We instead avoid, we're defensive and we avoid that real connection. And when someone gives you a real apology, it's like, what does it take to actually forgive, to really let go, to be like, I was heard and I heard them say how they're going to try not to do that more. Can I really let go? And I also talk about how to forgive people who like can't apologize to you or who are dead or whatever. You know what I mean? Who you can't, like sometimes the person is not going to. I think a lot of people feel this with people in their families. Like they may not be able to do the emotional work to see that something was done wrong, or they're dead. And like, can we just do that at our pace? Which it doesn't have to be like full and forever, but like, are there any parts of it where I can be like, I get why the way that person was socialized led them to do that for me. And I want to hold on to it a little less. Like, like finding ways to do partial forgiveness to free ourselves from that activity of holding that grudge and that um going over and over in our minds. Like, to me, we are tortured by that. Really, it's resentment. They say in 12-step programs, like resentment is that like I take the poison and expect you to drop dead. You know what I mean? Like this kind, like resentment is so hard on us. Resentment is a really bad feeling to live with. And it can include like grandiosity and righteousness. And so can I recognize when that's poisoning me and decide to have less of it, which might mean, just trying to see you as one of all beings, or trying to see you as like that you are at some point were a hurt child and that has something to do with why you've done this to me, or wanting to just, I often just do a visualization where I'm like, imagine I'm on my life path and they're on their life path and they're like both going forward parallel. They're not like, they have their own life path. I don't need to hold on to it and like have a big narrative about what they've done to me. Just like, how can I free myself from, like, I think that is what forgiveness does, but it's really not, because I feel like I tried to rush myself to forgive at different points in my life and wanted to feel like, yeah. And also that could be part of like an appeasing pattern where you just let yourself get treated by like a doormat. You know what I mean? Like, many people have been in a relationship where you've just let someone do this uncool thing to you again and again. Um, and maybe you felt like you're taking the high road, but actually there was something not grounded about it. And so a lot of this is about looking at our own motivations. Like, why do I keep staying in a situation that isn't working for me? Or why do I love to hold on to the narrative I mean, I've also stayed in relationships where I enjoyed on some level continually judging this person for doing this thing to me over and over again. That's, I think, a very common pattern in romantic relationships. Like, you're going to keep doing it. I'm going to keep judging you, but also kind of letting you do it by not having a boundary. Um, yeah, this is a complicated one, but um, I appreciate that this is an instruction to seek forgiveness. I think right now we live in a society that really encourages us to seek feeling like the victim. That is like the state that's like the authorized, like superior state, and it's terrible for us, and it generates like a lot of disconnection from one another and inability. Like, I'm looking for you to do the smallest thing wrong so that I can forever hold on to it, not give you direct feedback, and ditch you and be even more isolated. Or I'm unwilling to hear that I've done things wrong, um, because that doesn't feed a victim narrative. And so then when you try to give me feedback, I actually just separate from you. I can't bear it. So what I want is everyone to be able to give some feedback and try to hear each other and do it imperfectly and choose to stay connected. And that includes these like layers of forgiveness practice that are not about like once and for all. It never enters my mind again. In the book, I talk about my experience of dating someone, and for the first 7 years, he was actively dealing with alcohol addiction, and then he became sober, and then it was like this process of me realizing I was holding all these resentments from that story, and us having a therapeutic process where I could tell some of the stories, things that at the time when they happened, he hadn't been able to really apologize for. And now he could witness me and like say he heard me, and I could hear the apology and truly let it go. And I think most of us don't have experiences in our lives with important people getting real apologies and forgiving, because we like just have to break up, or, it never happens with our parents or at the job or whatever. And it changed me, like permanently changed me to have a real experience of of genuine witnessing an apology and forgiveness with someone. And like it made me more capable of being in relationships with people who do things imperfectly like I do, you know, and being like, oh, that's not the end of the road.
Yeah, that's like one of the things that I really value about Jewish teaching on missing the mark and repair is that it's not a reflection of like our eternal souls are damned. It is a path that we miss the mark or stray from the path and can find our way back. And it is an everyone misses the mark, and the gates of tshuva, the gates of repair are always open. They're like extra wide at this time of year when we're all doing it together, but they are always open. And it can be hard to feel and believe, and is like our tradition is full of reminders of that. Okay, if folks want to start, if you have questions you want to put in the chat, I'm going to ask one more and then we'll see from the room. I want to turn back to kind of like our communities and organizing. We are in a time when in the last 2 years, literally dozens of anti-Zionist Havarot and communities have Jewish prayer groups and community groups have formed, and they've been forming in times of, while fighting the genocide in Gaza, intense stress and struggle. And I'm curious, and this is like asking for a friend / myself, what do you want to share with newly forming groups as we are like just kind of like building the house, building the boat as we sail it, for new groups to put into place to support collective sturdiness and our relational care as we are building community groups together.
Yeah, I mean, I spend most of my time for the last many years supporting groups that are having trouble and like falling apart. All kinds of groups, mutual aid groups and arts groups, and groups that have a physical space they're holding, and different kinds of groups. And there's some very clear patterns of what helps groups sustain and like have good relationships and work through conflict that comes up. One thing is like transparency. Like a lot of groups fall apart because it's not clear how decisions get made here, and what happened to the money? And I mean, that's, wait, those two people are like, why do they get to decide, all of that related to that, forming clear horizontal structures. Nobody wants to do all this work under a boss. And that can be really challenging in faith communities where we're used to hierarchy. But the wisdom around the Torah is not the same wisdom as the wisdom around like all the other things a group does. You know what I mean? So it's easy for, Jewish groups or Buddhist groups or any groups that have teachers to make a weird, it's like, it's such a trap, And so having clear horizontal structures where it's like, what kind of collective is stewarding the group, and you've got teams. I've got a lot of workshops online about how to do this. You've got teams. This is the fundraising team. This is the team that puts on the programs on the weekend, and this is the team that makes the meals or whatever, and having it be clear how decisions are made. Like it's so essential, and making those decisions by consensus. So not having people outvote each other, because we're trying to get as many people as possible in these groups. And if you form a group where you're like, well, we'll just outvote each other, then it's like this set, 6 people have brought up the issue of COVID and disability justice, and 12 people outvoted them. So they all had left. Like, what have you done there? We actually want the groups to be places where the maximum wisdom comes together, and it's not based on majority wisdom, because sometimes it's a minority of people in the group who are elders or who have children or who are Black Jews or whatever the deal is. And so we actually don't want to create majority rule. Instead, we want horizontal consensus-based decision making and welcoming new people. So one of the other big mistakes that groups make is like it's hard to get in, or you don't know, like you get there and you don't know how to like have your ideas heard. You're in the group, but you're being given like kind of lesser tasks, or like how to let new people steward. And then a lot of times the 4 or 5 people who founded the group end up holding everything. And they want other people to do stuff, but they don't know why no one else is doing stuff. But it's actually, there's no clear transparency on how to become a co-steward. So I encourage groups to like have this transparency. And most groups do not start with these things. And it's okay. You can establish them later. I'll put something in the chat in a minute that has like some workshops on all this stuff and slides you can use. But even having conversations about the group culture, I have like a worksheet that's also in my book, Mutual Aid, like a chart about qualities of group cultures. And if everyone sits around and talks about the culture together and what's it like now, and what was a group you were in that had a culture you liked, and how did they get it? That's a lot better than us just having a fight where we're pointing fingers at each other, like, you always rush us, Jessica, and you're like, Dean, you never finish your task. Like, we can get at those things, not through a fight. And the other part of that is making conflict normal. Like, so like, be like, oh, of course we're going to disagree. I have people do like even 20-minute workshops about giving and receiving direct feedback. All the workshop materials are free on my website. And a video of me doing it so you can, see how it's done. Like just having people talk about deciding to give and receive feedback. I've also been thinking a lot about like using litany more, like being in faith groups or in 12-step groups. I'm really impressed by how when we say the same things at the beginning and the end, sometimes it can help establish a value. So like, hey, this is a group where we believe in direct feedback. We're going to try out being non-defensive to each other and saying what's happening and not turn towards gossip or ghosting when we have something to say to each other. And then having workshops also regularly about it, but also just naming that value. Or this is a group where we know we're all imperfect people doing imperfect work, and we're going to practice repair. And just saying some of those values like in the litany at the beginnings and ends of the meetings. I'm curious about what could happen for us if we just kept reminding each other of that. I also, worked with groups that are trying to specifically do like, let's do a workshop on like skillful relating, because they know people in the group are going to like meet and hook up and have friendships and become roommates and fall apart. So like how do we want to be when that inevitably happens? Like just building like basically believing that like social and emotional skills matter in our groups instead of just like getting out the next 6 meals or the next 6 events, and like getting out of that kind of like capitalist masculinist mindset that it's only output that matters and not how we do the work, because how we do the work, is determines whether or not it continues.
I love that. I mean, I love all of that. I mean, I think there's also something I'm thinking about when we, and specifically for cultural and spiritual communities or neighborhood groups where like we're actually not gonna go anywhere. We have nowhere to go. Like we're just gonna be Jewish in our small town for as long as we're here. Letting there be conflict that doesn't resolve right away and experimenting with things like, okay, we're going to try this for a season. We know that this is not what everyone in the group is happy about. We're going to come back to it, or kind of like, because I think sometimes there's like we have to figure this out now pressure, which, we sometimes have to figure out like what to do for this Shabbat now, but that doesn't mean it's what we have to do forever. Like, and so, I think how do we kind of like keep, and like, I definitely had the feeling I love these videos from Dean and the tools there and feeling like, oh God, if we didn't do the workshop on conflict styles in the first 6 months and it's like too late, and being like, no, we can do it now. We can do it year 3. We could do, and like weave the tools in. Always is the right time for that. Yeah.
I have to add something to this, which is like, I feel like there's 2 responses that happen when someone critiques a group for this group is ableist for doing this. This group did this racist thing to me. This group is transphobic or whatever. Either, and this is a long history for many of us in many organizations, everyone ignores it. Like, no, who cares? Which is horrible. And that's been kind of like the typical like white leadership, male leadership vibe, is like minimize all the bad things that happen in groups. But the other side of the coin that's very popular right now is like, oh my God, everything must come to a screeching halt. We must do whatever this person wants. I'm sorry, I have to get my pen with my foot. We must do whatever this person wants. And there can be almost like an appease thing where everyone's like, oh my God, a critique happened. And it's actually, I think unconsciously, it's reputation management. Um, it's not actually really right-sized or principled. And so one of the things I really want to ask groups to do is like, if something just came up in the group, before you stop everything you're doing forever, like just, are we doing this because we thought we could be perfect? Okay, you can't, and like, or we thought, I personally needed to look like the perfect white person or the perfect whatever person, and now I can't stand that someone's, like, it's like, can we just be like, yeah, like people are unhappy about some things we do. Some of them we might agree could be done better in this way. Sometimes people are unhappy and we don't think there's something we can do about it, or they're not all critique is fully grounded. Like that's a really complicated, like that level of nuance. Instead, what groups do is tear each other apart. Like you want to do everything I say that person, the complaint person said, and I want to do only part of it. And now we're in a huge fight, and now the group is breaking. So I just like I want us to try to find like some pause there, and some care, and be like, oh, because yeah, the idea that all groups should stop when they're imperfect is very bad, because we need our groups like super bad. Like we need to do all this work. We actually have to do it.
Yeah. I see one question in the chat. I'm like, did we say we did an hour 15? I feel like Dean and I texted about how long this would be, but I don't know if we talk. We take one question, then we'll start to close, and it'll probably go a little past the hour. And if folks need to go, that's cool. Okay. Dean, do you want to talk a little bit more about shame and how to think about it in an expansive way? Kids Mike Grace says, I grieve relationships that ended with a beloved stopping talking to me and struggle not to let those abrupt endings confirm the worst narratives I hold about myself.
Yeah. Well, one small thing someone said to me recently or no, it was actually a meme. Um, um, like something about like, don't get too fixated on someone's judgment if they're not someone you would take advice from. Because I think we all can get like really focused on like the judgment of like anyone. If anyone doesn't like anything about me, it's the end of the world. Because that's the kind of the standard a lot of us hold for ourselves, especially if we feel a lot of shame. So I do like to ask myself, like, yeah, especially someone I dated, like, do they have a grounded? I mean, they have some grounded critique of me, but they also might have ungrounded critiques of me, because we were in, the people you date, you see the least clearly, I think, in many ways, But yeah, shame is a huge part of my life. It's like really interesting, a couple of things about it. One thing people say about shame that I think is accurate is that it's often a response to early childhood trauma where you couldn't control what was happening. And so then the child, it's kind of unbearable to imagine that these bad things are happening and there's nothing I can do to stop them. So instead, I have a fantasy that I can stop them. I have a fantasy that I can control things that I can't control. And that leads to a story that like they happened because I'm bad. And that then visits all the time. And so it's easy to blame yourself for everything that happens in any relationship. Like some of us are externalizers and some of us are internalizers. Like something's wrong between us, it's your fault. Something wrong between us, it's my fault. And most of us do both some of the time. But like you may know, if you're like an internalizer who just like nonstop, like something's wrong in any relationship, I should be able to control it. You also might know if you're guided by shame, if your instinct is to hide, if you're like, I need to make sure my friend doesn't know my needs or doesn't know that I was upset. Like that's a shame reaction. I think a lot of shame reactions don't get properly labeled inside us. One thing that helped me a lot was learning. I was a student in generative somatics for many years, and we talk about something called the shame trampoline. So the shame trampoline, you can imagine there's a trampoline, and on it, all my shame messages are jumping up down. You're too much, or you shouldn't have said that, or your needs are bad, or whatever my story is. And the shame trampoline is protecting me from what's under the trampoline, which is a much scarier feeling, like terror or fear or hopelessness. Like, so I'm up here, like, let's say Jessica are in a activist group, and there's like battle and fighting happening in the group, and I feel really blamed, and like I'm mad at all these people, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm the worst. They all saw me be bad in the group, and I'm in the shame trampoline. And what's really underneath, is like some deep terror about belonging or whatever from like early childhood. So like with like most things, it's like when we can get to the deeper feeling, some of the I think there's also an anxiety trampoline. It's kind of very similar, you know. So whatever's really going on underneath, if I can feel there, if I can get there, my system's trying to protect me from it because that feeling was too much for me at some point in my life. But now I'm grown up and I actually usually feel relief. If I can get to what's under the trampoline, I actually usually that's better than staying up all night wondering if the things I wrote in that email were okay or if what I said in the meeting was bad or, you know, like all that stuff we all do, you know? Um, and so like this, yeah, this willingness to look for what's generating the shame. And the other thing I'll say is it really like helped me having a radical therapist who would just be like, you're like ashamed of being radical. Like all of everybody who's out here holding like positions that are unpopular in our society, there can be shame about that. Years and years of being like um having to take a position in a group that's unpopular for me, like being an abolitionist for many years in groups where people were like, that's unrealistic. Don't say that. You're ruining our big plans for this bill. You know, like whatever, like having to be an anti-Zionist in spaces where Zionism is normal and where being anti-Zionist is considered unacceptable, having to be a feminist when patriarchy is normalized, you know, whatever. All of the ways we have shame around having radical politics because we're marginalized in lots of spaces having to fight for these ideas and we believe in doing it, but being reminded that there's shame associated with it is actually kind of helpful, I think. Because then we can be kind to ourselves like, wow, you're doing something hard that's countercultural, that's requires a lot of bravery and you might need support. You got to go like after you do that, after you're the only one in that meeting saying that, like go get some support from other people who think this is the right politics or is the right position instead of getting shamed out of it. You know, and if you find yourself not saying what you really believe in meetings or spaces, you know, like is it shame? Is it like I'm not good enough? Everyone's going to find out that I'm not smart enough or whatever the story is. And the final thing I'll say, people probably know this, but the difference between shame and guilt, you know, guilt is like, you know, remorse for something I said or did. Shame is like believing I'm bad, you know? So it's not just, I wish I hadn't said that, which might be appropriate. Sometimes you wish you hadn't said something or done something, but like that fundamentally shows how terrible I am, like this person. And the question is like the worst narratives I hold about myself. So just like can I notice when the narratives are coming up? Can I run them by somebody who can help me find a more sober way of thinking and a more right-sized approach to like, if there was something I want to apologize for or something that wasn't aligned, you know, it's not like I can't look at that stuff, but I want to just notice if I'm veering into um, a shame approach.
Thank you for that. I will keep the trampoline in mind. If we have time for one more question, Drawer Malik says, I'd love some advice regarding institutional DARVO if possible. I don't know that word or that acronym. Maybe Dean does, or maybe Drawer, do you want to come off mute and say that acronym? Or type it, yeah.
DARVO stands for deny, attack, reverse victim and offender. It's a type of abusive dynamic that I've encountered in two different spaces whenever I bring up racism. And I've stopped interacting with those groups, and it would be nice to know if there is a way to work with that.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thanks.
really good question.
I mean, I think one way that, you know, I come at this from an abolitionist perspective where we don't believe in throwing people away, right? We try to get away from like a carceral approach to conflict. And one of the reasons that's so important is because whoever says abuse first isn't necessarily the person being harmed, right? Like you're describing like that, like people, it's really complicated to tell what's going on when people are in really painful conflicts. And so if we're just too like quick to like an automatic response, like someone said this word, we stop everything and do whatever they say. sometimes actually what's happening, and many of us have seen this, is that a person is using that to dominate a situation or another person. It's just really complicated. So instead of like an example of this in my day-to-day is like, I work with a lot of groups and they're like, should we have a grievance policy? And I'm like, no, I don't think groups should have grievance policies, because what I've noticed is that when there's a grievance policy or something formalistic, everybody gets in this like court mentality where they're like, I'll file a grievance against you, and then there'll be somebody who comes in and does, fact finding, and then I will be declared to be the winner. And and actually, like that whole way of thinking is like terrible for trying to actually resolve conflict. So I really encourage groups, and then it's like who got there first, and no one's ever satisfied. Once you get into like prosecution mentality, no one's satisfied. And then there can be weird things where it's like we have to be confidential about the grievance policy. And so even though the whole community is affected, no one can talk about what happened. It can get really just like, it's like we don't want to run courts, and courts don't work. I'm into abolishing all courts, and we don't want to run them. And so instead, what I've encouraged groups to do is like have ad hoc like conflict support teams. So, if Jessica and I are in a group and we're having a conflict, either between our teams or as individuals in the group or whatever, then we can, we're like, hey, we need it. Either of us or anybody could say, hey, those two, or we need like an ad hoc conflict support team. And some people in our group who've done some training about conflict offer to help us, but they're not going to be fact finders. They're not going to resolve it. It's just like, do you all need to talk together with another person there? Do you need, is there something the whole group needs to help this? Not, does the whole group need a training around ableism? Does the whole group need like and so it's not just like, it's not about like litigating, because I think a lot of abuse dynamics are worsened once we get into like a litigating mentality. And also one other thing I'll say about this is I talk to a lot of people about like one thing that happens a lot in our movements right now is something happens in the group or at this event or whatever. And instead of going to talk directly to somebody in the group or whatever, I go and like put it on the internet, or I like, instead of even writing to someone in their DMs, I like make a post about how terrible they are. And there's like a kind of unsatisfiableness. Like we want like, and it's not satisfying. Like it doesn't work to like tell the world how bad somebody is. Like it doesn't make us it doesn't usually produce justice. And so really, can we go towards direct feedback and like engagement rather than some of the strategies? I mean, I think that obviously there are moments when we do, especially if we're targeting like our political opponents or whatever, but there's kind of like a question where we could talk to our friends and colleagues about like, what is a pathway that's most likely to lead to actual resolution of harmful dynamics, instead of like the kind of like some of the methods of escalation that I think people use, that also, again, you can't tell like what the motivations are of someone who's using them. So if we could all be like a little more support one another to use direct feedback when possible and get that kind of support, instead of like going at it on our own and then only using public posting.
Thank you for that. I want to add, when I think about like organizations denying and accountability for harm, I think like normalizing a culture of we all make mistakes and we all perpetrate, and which I think like that's easy to say. We all make mistakes. We make mistakes. We all perpetrate harm is harder to say, and kind of like getting those words in our mouth actually like and being part of groups where, or like being and that not being an excuse to not change, and not work to transform, but actually just like normalizing that is part of human experience, and then thus part of being works in progress together, being imperfect together. And like, and that for me is then like, if people are kind of like denying the possibility that they could possibly have harmed someone else, like can be a group moment to pause and like, okay, what's actually happening here? Yeah. And just to name, there's so much painful things happening in our organizations and how it ripples through our lives. And I think the other thing I've really learned from Dean is like, it's okay for groups to split. It's okay to leave groups and find new ones. And that is like, can be really deeply painful. I think also to like not minimize. I think there's also a culture of like, we're not, I guess I will say kind of like I've had some of my biggest heartbreaks be in political organizations and with comrades and experiences. And it's sort of like when it's like pet grief isn't recognized, like interpersonal political grief, like not necessarily so recognized, to be like a breakup, like a political breakup, a harm in a political organization is like as or can be more intense than plenty of romantic, or it can be, you know, that's where we're playing out our family stuff. Like, so just to like honor the weight of that. And yeah, have either a therapist or a friend who will like take that those relationships seriously.
And we could all do something about that right now by listening more carefully to other people in our groups. Like it's like so many, because things are much more traumatizing when you're alone in it, right? And that's so many people's experience in political organizations. They try to name racism or transphobia or ableism in a political org, and they feel like they're like ignored, or even kind of like then people don't want to talk to them. You know, it can be really right. And then they end up leaving and are scared to do other political work of that kind, or just, you know, there's like people have like painful, horrible stories, or there's like a big conflict and they feel like they were kicked out. Like the more we can all just like lovingly and compassionately witness each other when we're in crisis right now, the less likely that traumatizing experience of I was alone when it happened. Because I think that so many people leave our movements forever after conflicts inside groups. It happens all the time. And we can't afford to lose everybody, all these brilliant people, you know. Yeah, and I think I appreciate what's being said in the chat. Like, yes, it's like figuring out when to call people out publicly and when to do it directly, or how, this is a fundamental, you know, transformative justice question, right? Like in transformative justice, we're resolving harm without the police. And so if I'm doing harm, you know, maybe first Jessica comes to me and then I don't listen. And then Jessica like goes to somebody who she knows I listen to. And she's like, will you talk to Dean? And then maybe it takes 10 people. She has to go to 10 people who she knows I listen to. And you know, like, what does it take? And that there are moments when people end up having to, you know, go public, but just trying to figure that out. Because I think what's happening right now is that a lot of times things are public very fast because of social media technologies. And it like a lot of it like escalates conflict and does not lead to truth telling. And then people like become permanently stigmatized or hurt themselves. I mean, like really scary shit is going on with how we're using these technologies and how they're impacting us. Also, I think it's worth saying here, like, if people go after you on the internet, welcome to the club. Like it'll happen to almost everybody. It doesn't mean that everybody in the world has seen it. It doesn't mean that, you know, like just always like talking if that happens to you, just knowing this is happening to people all the time. And if you do anything, if you do work in our communities, you will at some point be on someone's cancellation list. And like we have to normalize that as well, so that we don't feel like when it happens to us, we are like our lives are over and we're because, you know, like it's just like supporting one another. Like when you see that happening to someone, you know, like really helping support them through it. You know, even if it includes that they need, maybe some of it is feedback they needed. It's just like the stakes of this stuff are really dangerous for our communities right now and really hurting a lot of people.
And on that note, should we find something more hopeful then? Like we're gonna wrap up having solved everything about relationships. No, we haven't. There's so much more. Luckily, we'll get to keep reading and studying together. Dean, you can read his book. You could buy it. You could listen to it on audiobook. I'm gonna put it in the chat. He also has a podcast out where you can listen to him chat through more specific ideas. I don't actually have that link handy, but maybe you do, Dean. And do you want to say any upcoming events?
Yes, this is one upcoming event. The World Beyond War conference coming up in October has a theme around abolition, which I think is so cool. I'm going to be participating in that. It's going to be an online conference. Here's the podcast. I have an upcoming workshop that's not yet listed on this website, but it's coming up, I think, on September 8th. That's going to be like a mutual aid workshop. And I also wanted to share that I'm doing an event on September 7th that is for like book clubs. who've read my book or like have read my book with others. And it's going to be a fundraiser for the podcast. And with tickets that are as low as $3 a person, I think. And we'll be posting that soon. And so I hope people will come, and like we'll also just be celebrating what it's like to read books with other people.
Love that. What's more Jewish than reading books with other people? You could also, as we mentioned, be in a little Zoom room with me more often, starting after the high holidays, and with Rabbi Brandt for this coming year's Intro to Judaism, which can be intro fresh or re-engaging with Judaism after a long time, or as an anti-Zionist, I now have to relearn everything I was taught about Jewish history, which was certainly some time that I had some years ago and am always still learning. So currently, if you click that link and you're not a Tzedek Chicago member, I don't think the link works. If you are a Tzedek Chicago member, you can register now. It'll be public on the 15th. And also consider becoming a Tzedek Chicago member. Our oldest at a decade, like progressive anti-Zionist synagogue, which has so much on Zoom that you can attend or in person in Chicago. Thank you to Aviva for supporting this space and many others at Tzedek Chicago. Another upcoming learning opportunity, we're going to be doing, I'm going to be doing more holiday workshops in the coming year, and in Elul, Rabbi Alyssa Wise will be doing preparing for the high holidays workshop on Zoom. You can join for more of this kind of how do we hold the spiritual practice of holding complexity. Certainly need that in this time. Thank you, Dean, for being here and for bringing your vulnerability and your many years of study and wisdom to our movements. Thank you, everyone, for being here and for bringing your hearts and questions to this space and to the work we do together.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you to Aviva and Tzedek Chicago.
Take care, everyone.